Imagine squeezing your entire body through a food slot just 15 centimeters high. One man did. Prisoners of war secretly built a real, human-sized glider in a castle attic, hoping to fly to freedom. A famous lover and adventurer once escaped a high-security prison by cutting a hole through his cell floor and then the ceiling of the room below, eventually making his way across the prison's lid roof. One legendary Japanese escape artist dislocated his shoulders to slip out of handcuffs and picked locks with tools he fashioned himself. Number 14. The unbelievable trek from a Siberian gulag. Slavomir Rawicz, a Polish army lieutenant, was captured by Soviet forces in 1939. He was sent to a brutal Siberian gulag, a labor camp deep in the frozen wilderness. Conditions were horrific, with starvation, disease, and back-breaking work being daily realities. Rawicz, along with 6 other prisoners, decided they would rather risk death in the vast emptiness of Siberia than perish slowly in the camp. In 1941, during a blizzard that provided cover, they slipped away. Their initial supplies were meager: some bread, an axe, and a knife. What followed was an astonishing journey of endurance. They trekked south through the Gobi Desert, across the Himalayas, and finally into British India. They faced unimaginable hardships: extreme temperatures, lack of food and water, treacherous terrain, and the constant fear of recapture or wild animals. Some of their group did not survive the punishing conditions. The journey, as Rawicz later recounted in his book, The Long Walk, spanned thousands of miles and took over a year. They reportedly walked through blizzards, battled scurvy, and avoided patrols. Reaching India in March 1942, the survivors were emaciated and exhausted but free. The story of their escape highlights an almost superhuman will to live against overwhelming odds. While some details of Rawicz's account have been debated by historians over the years, the core narrative of a desperate flight to freedom from the depths of the Soviet prison system remains a powerful tale of human resilience. Number 13. The castle glider that almost took flight. Colditz Castle, Oflag IV, etc., was a special prisoner of war camp in Germany during World War II. It was considered escape-proof, housing Allied officers who had already tried to escape from other camps, but this only made the prisoners more determined. Colditz became famous for its ingenious and audacious escape attempts. One of the most remarkable, though ultimately not used, was the Colditz Cock. This was a full-sized, 2-man glider, secretly built by prisoners Bill Goldfinch, Jack Best, and about a dozen helpers. Starting in late 1943, they constructed it in a hidden workshop in a remote section of the castle's attic. The glider was made from stolen pieces of wood, bed slats, floorboards, tauten sleeping bag, linings for the skin, and even boiled millet porridge for glue. The wingspan was 32 feet, and the fuselage was 19 feet long. Plan was to launch it from the castle roof, hoping to glide over the River Molde and the nearby town to freedom. They even built a runway and a launching mechanism, using a bathtub filled with concrete as a counterweight. By the spring of 1945, the glider was complete and ready for launch. However, before they could put their daring plan into action, the American Army liberated Colditz in April 1945. The glider was never flown, but its existence hidden from the Germans for so long was a testament to the incredible ingenuity and spirit of the Colditz prisoners. It was a symbol of hope and defiance in the face of captivity. Number 12. London's infamous jailbreaker, Jack Sheppard. Jack Sheppard was a notorious English thief and escape artist in early 18th century London. His daring escapes from supposedly secure prisons made him a popular hero among the working classes, much to the annoyance of the authorities. Born in 1702, Sheppard was an apprentice carpenter, a skill that would later aid his escapes. He turned to crime and quickly gained a reputation. His first significant escape was from St. Giles's roundhouse. After being recaptured, he was imprisoned in New Prison. There, he broke through the ceiling, lowered himself with a rope made of bedclothes, and scaled a 22-foot wall. But his most famous exploits involved Newgate Prison, London's most formidable jail. He escaped from Newgate not once, but twice. In one instance, after being sentenced to death, he managed to break free from the condemned hold. He was visited by two women, who distracted the guards, allowing him to remove a spike from the hatch. He later squeezed through. Recaptured again and placed in Newgate's strongest part, the castle, heavily chained and manacled, Sheppard performed his most astonishing escape. Over several hours he picked his handcuffs, then the chains securing him to the floor. He then broke through 6 successive barred doors, using an iron bar he dislodged. He made his way to the roof, then re-entered the prison in a different section, went down some stairs, and calmly walked out the main door in the early hours of the morning. His freedom was short-lived each time, but his audacity and skill captivated the public. He was eventually hanged at Tyburn in 1724, but his legend as a master escapee lived on. Number 11. Papillon's 9 attempts to flee Devil's Island. Henri Charrière, nicknamed Papillon because of a butterfly tattoo on his chest, was a Frenchman convicted of murder in 1931 and sentenced to life imprisonment in the brutal penal colony of French Guiana. He always maintained his innocence. His autobiography, Papillon, details his numerous and persistent escape attempts from the infamous Devil's Island and other camps in the colony. The conditions were horrific, with disease, malnutrition, and guard brutality commonplace. Papillon's first escape was from a hospital, but he was quickly recaptured. Over the years, he claimed to have made 9 escape attempts. These involved incredible risks and resourcefulness. He endured long periods in solitary confinement as punishment for his efforts. He navigated treacherous jungles, bribed guards, and built makeshift rafts. One notable attempt involved sailing hundreds of miles in an open boat with fellow convicts, only to be shipwrecked and recaptured. His final and successful escape from Devil's Island, as he told it, was particularly daring. He observed the patterns of the waves, noticing that every 7th wave was large enough to carry something out to sea. He and a fellow prisoner, Machuet, constructed sacks filled with coconuts to use as flotation devices. They threw their coconut rafts into the churning waters from a cliff and leaped in after them. After days adrift surviving shark encounters and storms, they eventually made landfall in Venezuela. Papillon settled there, and later wrote his famous. While some critics have questioned the complete accuracy of all his claims, suggesting he may have incorporated other prisoners' stories, his narrative of relentless pursuit of freedom from one of the world's most notorious penal systems remains a compelling saga of human endurance and determination. Number 10. Dieter Dengler's jungle ordeal after a fiery crash. Dieter Dengler was a German-born U.S. Navy pilot whose plane was shot down over Laos during a secret mission in February 1966, early in the Vietnam War. After crash landing his Sky Raider, he evaded capture for a day, but was eventually taken prisoner by Pathet Lao troops. Dengler was subjected to brutal treatment, tortured, starved, and marched through the jungle for weeks. He was handed over to the Viet Cong and held in a small prison camp with other American and Thai prisoners. Conditions were horrific. They were given minuscule rice rations, suffered from disease, and faced constant abuse. Realizing that they would likely not survive long, Dengler and 6 other prisoners planned an escape. They knew it was incredibly risky. On June 29, 1966, after months of planning, they made their move. While the guards were eating, the prisoners managed to slip out of their loose hand and foot restraints, grab the guards' weapons, and overpower them. Dengler and fellow American prisoner Dwayne W. Martin fled into the dense, unforgiving jungle. What followed was a harrowing ordeal. They battled leeches, insects, snakes, starvation, and torrential rain. They had no map, no compass, and minimal supplies. After several weeks, tragically, Martin was killed by a Laotian villager. Dengler, alone and near death, continued to evade recapture. He ingeniously signaled a passing American aircraft by setting fire to a deserted village hut. After 23 days of struggling for survival in the jungle post-escape, he was finally rescued by a U.S. Air Force helicopter, emaciated but alive. Dengler was one of only a handful of American prisoners of war to escape captivity during the Vietnam War. Number 9. The unsolved riddle of the Alcatraz escape. Alcatraz, federal penitentiary, located on a rocky island in San Francisco Bay, was considered America's most secure prison, designed to hold inmates who were too troublesome for other federal prisons. No one had ever successfully escaped and remained free, or so the official story goes. In June 1962, inmates Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin vanished from their cells, sparking one of the most famous and intriguing escape stories in history. A 4th inmate, Alan West, was part of the plan, but didn't make it out of his cell in time. For months, the group had meticulously planned their breakout. Morris, known for his intelligence, was the suspected mastermind, using sharpened spoons, dummy ventilator, grills made of cardboard, and a makeshift drill fashioned from a vacuum cleaner motor. They painstakingly chipped away at the decaying concrete around the ventilation ducts in their cells. To hide their work and their absence during the night, they sculpted incredibly lifelike dummy heads from a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and paint, complete with real human hair stolen from the prison barbershop. They placed these heads in their bunks to fool the guards during nighttime checks. On the night of June 11, 1962, Morris and the Anglin brothers squeezed through the widened vents, climbed into an unguarded utility corridor, made their way to the prison roof, and then shimmied down a drain pipe. They had constructed a raft and life vests from over 50 stolen raincoats, carefully stitched and vulcanized using heat from steam pipes. They launched their raft into the treacherous, cold waters of San Francisco Bay. An intensive search found pieces of the raft and a waterproofed bag containing personal effects, but the men themselves were never found. The FBI officially concluded they drowned, but no bodies were ever recovered, leading to endless speculation that they might have made it to shore and disappeared. Number 8. Mary, Queen of Scots, slips away from Loch Leven Castle. Mary, Queen of Scots, had a tumultuous reign, and in 1567, after being forced to abdicate the Scottish throne in favor of her infant son James, she was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle. Castle was situated on an island in the middle of Loch Leven, making it a seemingly secure prison. Mary was held there for almost a year, but she was determined to regain her freedom and her throne. Her first attempt at escape in March 1568 involved her disguising herself as a laundress. She managed to get into a boat leaving the island, but one of the boatmen noticed her delicate white hands, which were clearly not those of a working woman, and realized her identity. She was returned to captivity. Undeterred, Mary plotted again. This time, she found help from within the castle. Willie Douglas, a young orphaned relative of the castle's owners, the Douglas family, became infatuated with her or was perhaps sympathetic to her cause. George Douglas, another member of the family, was also involved in planning. On the evening of May 2nd, 1568, during supper, Willie Douglas managed to steal the keys to the castle gates from his grandfather, Sir William Douglas, who was the Laird of Loch Leven. He locked the Laird and his family in the castle tower. Mary, disguised once again this time as a servant girl, slipped out with one of her waiting women. Willie rowed them across the loch to the shore, where George Douglas and a party of supporters, including Lord Seaton, were waiting with horses. As they rowed away, Willie dramatically threw the castle keys into the loch. Mary quickly raised an army, but her forces were defeated at the Battle of Langside just a few weeks later. She then fled to England, seeking help from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, a decision that ultimately led to her long imprisonment and eventual execution. Number 7. Casanova's daring rooftop dash from the Doge's palace. Giacomo Casanova, renowned as a lover, adventurer, and author, was also a master of escape. In 1755, he was arrested in Venice for alleged offenses against religion and public decency and imprisoned in the Piombi, the notorious attic cells of the Doge's palace. These cells were located directly under the palace's lead-covered roof, making them oppressively hot in summer and freezing in winter. Escape was considered impossible. Casanova, however, was not one to accept his fate. He initially planned to escape by laboriously digging a hole through the floor of his cell. He managed to acquire an iron rod, which he sharpened into a spike. After months of painstaking work, just as he was about to break through, he was unexpectedly moved to a different cell. Undaunted, Casanova devised a new, even more audacious plan. He befriended a fellow prisoner, Father Marino Balbi, who was in an adjacent cell. Casanova managed to pass his sharpened iron rod to Balbi through a hole he made in the wall. Balbi was instructed to cut a hole in the ceiling of his own cell. Once Balbi was out, he was to cut a hole in the ceiling of Casanova's cell from above. On the night of October 31st, 1756, the plan went into action. Balbi made his way into the space above the cells. He then helped Casanova out. The two men climbed onto the steep, slippery lead roof of the Doge's palace. They navigated the treacherous tiles in the darkness, eventually finding a dormer window. Casanova used his iron spike to force it open. They climbed into a room below which turned out to be part of the palace chancellery. They waited until morning. Then Casanova, dressed in his fine clothes, which he had managed to keep, boldly walked towards the main stairs, hoping to bluff his way out. A guard, seeing his confident demeanor, assumed he was an official and let him pass. Casanova and Balbi simply walked out the main gate to freedom, hired a gondola, and left Venice. Number 6. John Dillinger's wooden gun trick. John Dillinger was one of America's most notorious and modic bank robbers during the Great Depression. His string of daring heists and narrow escapes from the law made him a folk hero to some and public enemy number one to the FBI. In early 1934, Dillinger was captured in Tucson, Arizona, and extradited to Indiana to face charges for murdering a police officer. He was incarcerated in the supposedly escape-proof Lake County Jail in Crown Point, Indiana. The jail was heavily guarded, and authorities were confident they had Dillinger secured. However, on March 3, 1934, Dillinger stunned everyone by escaping. According to the most widely accepted story, Dillinger had somehow fashioned a fake gun from a piece of wood. Some accounts say it was a washboard or a block of wood from his cell, and blackened it with shoe polish to make it look real. Armed with this convincing-looking prop, Dillinger allegedly bluffed his way out. He used the wooden gun to intimidate guards, forcing them to open his cell door. He then reportedly rounded up several guards and fellow inmates, locked them in cells, and made his getaway. To add insult to injury, Dengler stole the brand new Ford V8, belonging to Sheriff Lillian Hawley, the very person who had boasted that the jail was unescapable. He drove across state lines to Chicago, an act that brought the FBI, then known as the Bureau of Investigation, fully into the manhunt due to federal laws against transporting stolen vehicles across state lines. The details of the wooden gun have been debated, with some suggesting he might have had a real gun smuggled in. Regardless of the exact mechanics, Dengler's escape from Crown Point was a major embarrassment for law enforcement and further cemented his legendary status. He remained at large for several more months before being famously gunned down by FBI agents outside the Biograph Theater in Chicago in July 1934. Number 5. Pascal Payet's helicopter getaways. Pascal Payet, a French criminal convicted for murder during a robbery, became infamous for his incredibly audacious and repeated escapes from prison using hijacked helicopters. His first such breakout occurred on October 12, 2001, from Louin's prison in southern France. Accomplices on the outside hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to fly to the prison. The helicopter landed on the prison roof, picked up Payet, and flew away. He remained on the run for some time, even reportedly undergoing plastic surgery to alter his appearance. He was eventually recaptured in 2003. But Payet wasn't just content with his own freedom. He also helped others. In April 2003, while still a fugitive, he organized another helicopter escape from the same Louin's prison for 3 fellow inmates who had been involved in his original crime. They too were eventually caught. Payet was arrested again and received an additional 7-year sentence for the helicopter escape. He was placed under high security and frequently moved between prisons to prevent further escape attempts. However, on July 14, 2007, Bastille Day in France, Payet did it again. This time, he escaped from Grasse prison on the French Riviera. 4 masked men, heavily armed, hijacked a helicopter from Cannes. They forced the pilot to fly to Grasse prison, where it landed on the roof. Payet, who was on an exercise yard, was quickly whisked aboard. The entire operation took less than 5 minutes. The helicopter later landed nearby, and Payet and his accomplices disappeared. This 3rd helicopter assisted escape, 2 for himself and 1 for others, cemented his reputation as a master of this particular method. His daring escapes highlighted vulnerabilities in prison security and led to calls for measures like anti-helicopter nets over prison yards. Payet was eventually recaptured in Spain in September 2007 after a major international manhunt. Number 4. The Great Escape from Stalag, Luft III. During World War II, Stalag Luft III was a German prisoner of war camp designed to hold captured Allied airmen. It was considered highly secure, built on sandy soil that made tunneling difficult and equipped with seismic microphones to detect digging. Despite this, the prisoners, led by squadron leader Roger Bushell, embarked on one of history's most ambitious and famous escape plots. Plan was to dig 3 long and deep tunnels, code-named Tom, Dick, and Harry. The idea was that if one tunnel was discovered, the Germans would be unlikely to search for others. Hundreds of prisoners were involved in various aspects of the operation: digging, dispersing the excavated sand, often down their trouser legs, tailoring civilian clothes, forging documents, and creating maps and compasses. Harry was the tunnel ultimately used for the escape. It was over 330 feet long and 30 feet deep. The prisoners ingeniously used bedboards to shore up the tunnel walls and created a ventilation system using Klim-powdered milk cans. They even installed electric lighting tapped from the prison's own supply. On the night of March 24, 1944, the escape began. Plan was to get over 200 men out. However, the tunnel exit turned out to be short of the tree line, exposing escapers to a nearby sentry tower. This, along with other delays, slowed the process. In total, 76 men managed to crawl through Henri to temporary freedom. When the escape was discovered in the early morning, a massive manhunt was launched. Of the 76 escapees, only 3 managed to make it to safety. The remaining 73 were recaptured. Adolf Hitler was so enraged by the escape that he ordered 50 of the recaptured men to be executed by the Gestapo, a war crime. The Great Escape became a symbol of Allied ingenuity and defiance, and a stark reminder of the brutality of the Nazi regime. Number 3. The Auschwitz Report carried by Wetzler and Weyrba. In April 1944, 2 young Slovakian Jews, Rudolf Weyrba, Walter Rosenberg, and Alfred Wetzler, achieved what few had ever managed. They escaped from the Auschwitz II Birkenau extermination camp. Their aim was not just to save their own lives, but to alert the world to the horrific truth of the Nazi genocide. Weyrba and Wetzler had been working in positions within the camp that gave them access to information about the scale of the killings and the mechanics of the extermination process. They meticulously gathered details about the gas chambers, crematoria, and the systematic murder of Jews and other targeted groups. Their escape plan was daring and incredibly risky. They decided to hide in a hollowed-out woodpile located in an area between the inner and outer perimeter fences of Birkenau, an area that was searched less thoroughly after an initial alarm. For 3 days and nights, from April 7th to April 10th, 1944, they hid in this tiny, cramped space, sprinkling tobacco soaked in gasoline to deter sniffer dogs. The SS guards searched for them, assuming they had escaped outwards, and eventually called off the intensified local search. Once they believed it was safe, Weyrba and Wetzler, dressed in scavenged civilian clothes, emerged and began an 80-mile, 11-day trek south to Slovakia, navigating by night and hiding by day. Upon reaching Zelina, Slovakia, they made contact with the Jewish Council and dictated a detailed 32-page report about Auschwitz, known as the V.R.B. Wetzler Report. It provided some of the earliest, most comprehensive eyewitness accounts of the gas chambers and the systematic extermination. The report was eventually distributed to Allied governments and Jewish organizations, contributing to pressure on the Hungarian government to halt deportations of Jews to Auschwitz, an action credited with saving many lives. Their bravery provided crucial evidence of the Holocaust while it was still happening. Number 2. The Korean yoga master who slipped through a food safe. Choi Gap-bok, a South Korean man with a history of theft and robbery, gained international attention in September 2012 for an escape that seemed almost superhuman. He was arrested on suspicion of robbery and was being held at a police station detention cell in Daegu, South Korea. Choi, who was 50 years old at the time, was a long-time practitioner of yoga. On the morning of September 17th, while the 3 guards on duty were asleep, Choi made his move. He applied skin ointment to his upper body to make himself slippery. Then, in an astonishing display of flexibility, he managed to squeeze his 5-foot 5-inch frame through the tiny rectangular food slot at the bottom of his cell door. The food slot was reportedly just 15 centimeters, 5.9 inches high, and 45 centimeters, 17.7 inches wide. The entire escape took him only about 34 seconds. He contorted his body like a squid, as one officer later described it. To further aid his escape and muffle any sound, Choi had reportedly placed pillows under his blanket to make it appear as if he were still sleeping in his cell. Once out of the cell, he slipped past the sleeping guards and out of the police station. The police didn't realize he was gone for several hours. His escape triggered a large manhunt. Choi remained at large for 6 days before he was eventually recaptured in an apartment building in Milyang, south of Daegu. He was found hiding in a cardboard box on the roof. After his recapture, he was reportedly placed in a cell with an even smaller food slot. Choi Gap-bok's incredible escape earned him nicknames like the Korean Houdini and highlighted his extraordinary physical abilities honed by years of yoga practice. Number 1. Yoshi Shiratori, Japan's undefeated jailbreaker. Yoshi Shiratori is a legendary figure in Japanese penal history, renowned for his almost supernatural ability to escape from prison. He escaped from various prisons a total of 4 times during the 1930s and 1940s, earning him the nickname, "The Man No Prison Could Hold." His methods were incredibly resourceful and often relied on his keen observation skills, patience, and physical prowess, including the ability to dislocate his joints. Shiratori's first escape was from Omomori prison in 1936. He had been studying the guards' routines for months. He picked a lock of his handcuffs and cell door, using a small piece of metal wire he found in a bath bucket. He was recaptured 3 days later. Sent to Akita prison in 1942, he faced harsher conditions. He regularly climbed the smooth copper walls of his cell to a small skylight in the ceiling, which he slowly loosened over time. He escaped through this skylight during a storm. This time, he remained free for 3 months before being arrested again. His third escape, and perhaps his most famous, was from Abashiri prison in Hokkaido, known for its extreme cold and brutal conditions. He was placed in specially made handcuffs and leg irons. Shiratori would drip miso soup onto his handcuffs and the inspection slot of his cell door, causing them to corrode. After months, the metal weakened enough for him to break. He then dislocated his shoulders to squeeze through the small square inspection slot in his cell door on August 26, 1944. He was on the run for over a year. His final escape was from Sapporo prison in 1947. The guards, knowing his reputation, took extreme precautions. He was in a specially built cell, watched 24/7. Shiratori noticed the floorboards under his bunk were not well secured. He used a sharpened piece of a food bowl to dig through the rotten wooden floor. He emerged outside, used a bowl to dig under the prison wall, and vanished. After a year, he reportedly had an encounter with a police officer, felt remorse for an accidental injury he caused, and turned himself in. He was paroled in 1961 and lived the rest of his life peacefully.